Karen's scream echoed through the tunnel like a banshee trapped in a culvert. Water was already waist-high, and the HOA board's shiny little convoy of SUVs was nose-deep in a mess they created. One of them was banging on the windows, another yelling into a dead walkie-talkie. I was sitting on top of the tunnel's concrete ledge sipping sweet tea, like it was a Sunday picnic. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got here, why the president of the Willowgate HOA is currently trapped in my private tunnel, soaked, panicking, and minutes away from learning what poetic justice actually feels like. Well, let's rewind a bit. It started with a piece. Only inherited land can offer a kind of stillness passed down like a secret between generations. My grandfather bought this place in 1946 after returning from the war, when the county was still more cows than commuters. He built the tunnel himself, or at least paid a local crew in cash, beer, and pie to dig it. It was wide enough for cattle, horses, and an old tractor to pass through beneath the county road, a safety measure to avoid dragging livestock across asphalt. Over time, the tunnel became more than just a crossing. It was a line that connected pastures, a hidden shortcut between the barn and the backfield, and in my hands, a well-maintained piece of rural infrastructure. When he passed, I moved back from the city, ditching my marketing gig and buying his tools off my cousins. I kept the place tidy, fixed the hinges on the steel gates, kept the brush clear from the entrance. The tunnel was mine, along with 28 acres that ran like a horseshoe around the edge of Willowgate Estates, a gated community that looked like it had been vomited out of a catalog and airlifted into the countryside. We never had issues until they hit phase 4. At first, it was survey trucks, then bored teenagers on bikes. Then one day, I noticed a plastic stake driven into the edge of my fence line, like a tiny red flag of war. I pulled it up, tossed it in the trash, and thought nothing more of it. But within 2 weeks, my pasture gate, the one that led to the tunnel, had fresh orange spray paint on the ground in front of it. And then came the gravel trucks. I got home from hauling feed one afternoon and found them paving over the old livestock path, filling the ruts with crushed limestone, and running a plate compactor over what used to be hoof trails. At first, I thought it was a utility easement job gone sideways. Then I saw the contractors' shirts. They didn't have county logos. They had the HOA's Willowgate Improvement Committee printed in blocky white letters on navy polos, like a suburban paramilitary. I stood there with my mouth open as some guy with a clipboard started rattling off permit code, saying the tunnel had been absorbed into the community's multi-use trail plan. Absorbed. That tunnel was older than their entire neighborhood. I told them to stop. They didn't. They just smiled, nodded, and said to contact Karen with any questions. Karen Mitchell, HOA president, former real estate agent, now self-appointed queen of cul-de-sac regulation. I tried to reach her. Emails bounced. Her assistant couldn't disclose her personal contact information. Then they tore my gate clean off. One morning, I drove out to check the southern fence line and found the steel tubing I'd welded myself lying in the weeds, cut at the base like a fallen tree. In its place was a wide open mouth, an invitation. They'd paved the inside of the tunnel, 2 added solar lighting strips along the concrete arch, and to top it off, they'd installed a keypad access system on the northern end. I couldn't even walk through the tunnel without getting buzzed in like a delivery man. The worst part, they didn't ask, not once. They just assumed it was theirs. I found out later they'd filed an emergency access integration request with the county, piggybacking on a school bus reroute application from 2 years ago. It was buried in paperwork no one reads, and once the tunnel was functional, they demolished the original access road into Willowgate, the long winding one that ran through the hills. I watched it get torn apart like a snake shedding skin. The asphalt chewed up and hauled away until nothing was left but dirt and dead weeds. Now the only way in or out of the entire neighborhood was through my tunnel, my private, deed-protected livestock access tunnel. What used to be a peaceful shortcut for me was now bumper-to-bumper minivans, bike trailers, and bored suburbanites cutting across my pasture like they paid rent. One lady even parked on my grass to let her dog pee. I confronted her. She told me to take it up with the board. That was the moment something broke in me. I stood in that field watching a place I'd spent years restoring get turned into a commuter route for people who didn't know a gate latch from a garden hose, and I knew I had to do something, so I started documenting. I took photos, every car that passed through, every tire tread that marked my soil. I logged dates, times, license plates, even counted the HOA's security golf cart zipping through twice a day like they were on patrol. I checked county maps, dug out the original deed from my grandfather's 10-strong box, and what I found buried in the legal ease made me smile. They'd messed up. They'd stolen something they never had a right to, and I was about to make them pay for every single wheel rut, every inch of concrete, and every smug little wave from Karen's Range Rover as she zipped through the tunnel like it was her God-given right. They'd taken my tunnel. Now, I was going to take back everything. The first thing I did was walk the length of the demolished road with a measuring wheel and a notebook. The original road to Willowgate Estates had run from County Route 12 all the way down to the subdivision's gate, a snaking mile of decent blacktop, 2 lanes, striped with a pull-off for emergency vehicles, and signage approved by the county back in 2004. It had wear, sure, but it wasn't beyond repair yet, according to the HOA's public meeting minutes, which I accessed through a begrudgingly cooperative board member named Cheryl, who still owed me for pulling her truck out of a ditch last winter. The board had voted unanimously to decommission and reconstruct the main road, citing safety concerns, drainage issues, and structural integrity degradation. That was their excuse. The contract they awarded for demolition and grading, $482,000, just to tear the thing up and haul away asphalt. No plans for a new road, just replacement via alternate neighborhood ingress, which turned out to be my tunnel. I compared the invoice to a county contractor's estimate from the year before, which priced a full mill and repave at $190 with emergency grant funding pending from the state. So not only had they bypassed the cheaper option, they done so without applying for the financial relief the county had pre-approved. Why? Because it was never about fixing the road. It was about funneling every resident in Willowgate through my land, under my tunnel, and straight into HOA Karen's glittering little empire. I tried attending a county zoning meeting to raise the issue, spoke during the public comment section, wore a button-down, kept it polite, mentioned the gate theft, the fence damage, the unauthorized demolition, got a lot of nods, a few sympathetic glances. Then I watched a man in a gray suit whisper into the ear of the zoning chair mid-session. After that, nothing I said mattered. They moved on to the next agenda item, like I just asked about dog park. Hours I left steaming. A week later, a letter from the zoning board arrived thanking me for my civic engagement and assuring me that the matter of HOA access infrastructure was reviewed and found compliant with county development ordinances. No signature, just a stamp. That's when I stopped trying to play nice. I dug in. I took a week off work and practically moved into the records office. I brought coffee to the clerk on the morning shift and donuts to the one on the night shift. I pulled every plat map, zoning variance permit, application, and utility easement filed in the last decade, and what I found was a mess of contradictions. The HOA's request to demo the road was filed under infrastructure decommissioning, but their follow-up paperwork reclassified the tunnel as emergency egress enhancement. They tried to call it a fire route, but the fire department had never approved it. In fact, it wasn't even on their maps. The clincher, the tunnel had never been zoned for community traffic. It was listed in every document from 1947 onward as private agricultural undercrossing, non-easement, non-commercial. That meant no one, not even the county, had the right to repurpose it for traffic unless they negotiated directly with the landowner, which in this case was me. But it got better. I pulled old floodplain overlays from FEMA and the county engineering office and laid them out side by side. The tunnel sat dead center on a red-striped section marked 100-year flood overflow zone, meaning that in the event of a serious storm, it was legally required to remain unobstructed to allow overflow from Brush Creek, converting it into a permanent road-violated state flood control protocols. I checked the most recent map submission the HOA had filed. The tunnel wasn't labeled as a flood relief passage. They'd white-outed the designation and resubmitted it as a green corridor, and it had passed approval because the submission was signed off by a guy named Brad Keller, head of inspection services for the county. That rang a bell. I looked him up. His mother's maiden name, Mitchell. Karen's maiden name. I cross-referenced social media, local real estate licenses, and a few archived obituaries. Turns out Brad and Karen are cousins. He'd fast-tracked her tunnel application through in 12 business days, a process that normally takes 90. I sent an anonymous request to the county ethics board just to see what would happen. I wasn't holding my breath, but that wasn't the only thing I found in the strong box buried behind my grandfather's workshop. Wrapped in wax paper and tucked between 2 property deeds was the original land covenant from 1937, drafted back when the land was first parklet out of the old Eastwood Ranch. It had a clause I'd never noticed before, likely because no one in living memory had reason to enforce it. Section 4C, handwritten, read: "The livestock tunnel constructed by the deed holder shall not be used for commercial or residential traffic, nor shall it serve as right-of-way ingress or egress for neighboring parcels in perpetuity." It had been signed by both the original ranch owner and the county registrar. Not only did the HOA not have a legal easement, the deed explicitly banned what they were doing. The clause hadn't expired. It was permanent, binding, and enforceable. I brought the document to a local attorney I knew from 4 club days, a woman named Teresa Dale, whose firm specialized in rural property disputes. She read it twice and then said, "Oh yeah, that's a kill shot." The phrase gave me chills, but I didn't want to just stop them. I wanted to make it hurt. I wanted every SUV that rolled through that tunnel to be a witness in the case, every HOA resident to know exactly who built their shortcut on a lie. So I got to work. Cameras, trail monitors, pressure sensors, infrared lights. I mapped out every license plate that used the tunnel, log timestamps, kept track of traffic volume and flow. I even caught Karen's husband Bob using it to host unofficial property tours for prospective buyers like it was some kind of exclusive Greenway entrance amenity. They were selling my tunnel as a feature, selling it. That's when I knew it wasn't just entitlement, it was greed. They saw my land as free real estate, a cost-cutting detour they could pave over with HOA bylaws and backroom favors. But I had something they didn't: history-proof and just enough stormwater infrastructure to make them very, very sorry. That's when the trap began to take shape. They called it the Willowgate Tunnel Ride, a community bonding experience to celebrate the completion of their new shortcut. Road flyers went up at the HOA clubhouse on laminated signs, zip-tied to mailboxes, even taped to my own fence posts like an invitation to my own execution. Karen's name was stamped across the bottom in curly font right above the words, "Join us for a ceremonial drive through our beautiful new tunnel entrance." They even planned a pancake breakfast at the start and a balloon arch at the finish, and that's when I knew they'd gotten arrogant, complacent, drunk on their own suburban delusions. They'd paved over my property, erased the floodplain codes, cut me out of the legal process entirely, and now they wanted to parade through my tunnel like conquering heroes. I didn't sleep much that week, not because I was stressed, because I was wiring shut the floodgates. I'd already filed the formal motion with the county to reclaim private access and enforce the 1937 covenant. I'd submitted annotated floodplain overlays to the State Environmental Board, complete with drone footage, satellite timestamps, and 3 sworn statements from neighboring landowners confirming they'd never granted right-of-way. But none of that would stop the HOA in time, not before the tunnel ride. Bureaucracy moves like molasses, but revenge moves at flood speed. 2 weeks prior, I dug out the old creek intake, a rusted steel grate buried beneath 30 years of silt and poison ivy, and retrofitted it with a reinforced backflow valve I'd salvaged from a condemned feed mill upstream near the spring head that fed Brush Creek. During the wet season, I installed a secondary floodgate, pressure sealed and connected to a buried length of irrigation line I rigged to a release lever tucked inside a hay bale on the back pasture, a redundant system just in case one didn't catch. Both gates were manual, but the release lines, those were remote. A little help from an electrician buddy and a second-hand signal relay, and I could open them from my phone. I tested it twice. The pasture flooded in under 15 minutes, not enough to drown, but enough to send a message, enough to make people rethink which part of the country they were trespassing through. Meanwhile, I got in touch with someone who still had a nose for scandal. Her name was Alexi Hahn, a journalist for the county's weekly rag who had a personal vendetta against HOA corruption after a board once forced her father to paint his barn top. I gave her everything: the photos, the easement maps, the permit inconsistencies, the cousin in code enforcement, the missing municipal grant money that had vanished right after the road was demoed. She was so excited she nearly spilled coffee on my legal binder. She said she'd be there on tunnel day, front row, ready to film. I told her to bring a kayak just in case. Then came the rain, not a downpour, not yet, but a steady spring shower that soaked the hills and filled the culverts with a low, steady hum. The water table rose by 1.5 inches overnight. That meant the tunnel would already be damp. All I had to do was open the gates. I parked my truck on the ridge where I could see both tunnel entrances but not be seen. I brought a thermos of black coffee, a pair of binoculars, and my granddad's old Winchester in case some HOA vigilante decided to go rogue. The first minivan rolled up at 9:13 a.m. sharp. White Honda Odyssey. Karen, she was wearing a plastic sash that read "Board President" like she'd been elected to Congress. Behind her came a line of cars, SUVs, sedans, even a couple of golf carts decorated with streamers. One guy had strapped a giant inflatable eagle to his roof. They had no idea they were about to drive into a concrete coffin. At the far end of the tunnel, HOA volunteers had set up a finish line complete with folding chairs and a portable speaker playing John Denver. That's where Alexi stood with her camera. The plan was simple: once 5 cars entered the tunnel, enough to ensure gridlock, but not enough to cause permanent damage, I'd activate both floodgates. Then I'd hit the switch on the steel barriers I'd welded over the course of 3 weeks from repurposed cattle guards and a spare hydraulic jack. They were hinged disguised as livestock fencing and built to slam shut with over a 000 lb of pressure, one gate on each end. Once they were inside, there'd be no way out. Karen gave some speech at the head of the convoy. I couldn't hear it, but I'm sure it was full of phrases like community vision and sustainable growth. She waved her clipboard, gestured toward the tunnel, and the parade began. First her Odyssey, then a black Lexus with AW Glory vanity plate, then a Subaru with tennis stickers, then the HOA Secretary's Toyota, then Doug the HOA treasurer in his Ford Expedition, tailgating like he had somewhere to be. That was my cue. 5 cars and 24 wheels, $150,000 of suburbia now sitting in my tunnel. I pulled out my phone, opened the floodgate app, pressed release. The signal relay took 3 seconds to respond. The pressure valves hissed, and then I heard it, the low, throaty rumble of water forced through narrow pipes. At the same time, I pressed the second control. Both tunnel gates slammed shut with a clang that echoed off the ridge line like a church bell made of vengeance. The reaction was immediate. I saw brake lights, reverse lights. 1 car honked, then 2, but the tunnel was curved, and they couldn't see the water yet, not until it reached the bumpers, and then it came rising up from both ends like the tunnel itself was exhaling brown silt. Heavy runoff poured in from the pasture intake, joined by clear cold spring water from the north. Within 60 seconds, the water was ankle deep. By 2 minutes, it was licking the doors at the far end. I saw the finish line. Volunteers scatter. 1 golf cart reversed straight into a folding chair. Karen climbed out of her van and started shouting at someone behind her, probably Doug. 1 woman tried her walkie-talkie. Nothing. Dead signal. I hadn't jammed it. Nature had. The water was doing what it always did, finding the path of least resistance, and now that path led straight through the FL floorboards of HOA leadership. From my ridge, I watched them panic, watched the Ford back into the Subaru, watched Karen waving her hands like a flight marshal, screaming for someone to do something, but there was nowhere to go. They blocked off the old road, torn down the original gate, put every egg in one shortcut, and now that shortcut was a bathtub. Alexi caught it all every second. Her footage would later get 500,000 views and a write-up in the local Tribune, but for now, I just watched silent. Still, the coffee in my thermos was still warm. The rain came down steady. The water rose, and finally, Karen looked up toward the ridge, toward me, and realized who had just pulled the lever on her empire. I tipped my hat, then I started walking down, not to rescue, just to say hello. The sirens came long after the screaming stopped. Flashing lights bounced off the tunnel's concrete curves as fire crews waded through knee-deep runoff with bolt cutters, thermal cameras, and a lot of questions. I stood to the side, arms crossed, soaked through but dry where it mattered. I'd already opened the floodgates. No need for actual harm, just enough water to make a point. But even drained, the tunnel still stank of humiliation. Karen was the last one they pulled out, wrapped in a metallic blanket, like a war casualty, barking orders at a firefighter half her age who couldn't stop laughing. The Range Rover, bless its over-engineered heart, refused to start. The water had shorted the electronics, and by the time the rescue crew got it to the tunnel mouth, it was pronounced dead on arrival. I heard someone say, "That's what happens when you cut corners on permits." And I may have smiled that night. Alexis's footage aired on the 10 o'clock news, sandwiched between a story about a runaway emu and a school board recall. Tunnelgate, they called it. The video ran unedited, Karen's voice echoing off the tunnel walls as water gurgled at her knees. The chaos of reverse lights slamming into bumpers, HOA board members climbing onto their roofs like kids playing hot lava. But it was the follow-up piece that really did the damage. Alexi didn't just film the event, she dug deeper. She interviewed the county engineer who'd flagged the floodplain violation, the former treasurer who confirmed Karen had fast-tracked the road demo funds to her cousin's construction firm, even a clerk at the zoning office who admitted she'd been pressured to overlook the missing paperwork. The piece ended with drone footage of the tunnel, now warped and waterlogged, framed with the caption built on a lie. Never underestimate the quiet person on the edge of the map. Property rights aren't just legal, they're personal, generational, and deeply woven into the land itself. If you're part of a community, respect the boundaries that built it. Because shortcuts made in boardrooms might seem efficient until they run headfirst into someone who remembers where the fences used to be. And if you're going to pave over history, you better know exactly whose name is still on the deed. Moral of the story: just because something looks like it's been forgotten doesn't mean it's yours to take.